INFJs are known for being deep thinkers, perfectionists, and sometimes obsessive. But where's the line between a rare INFJ personality quirk and something more serious, like OCD? This is a question I get a lot, and it matters because INFJs make up only about 2% of the population. We're the rarest personality type, and we already feel misunderstood. Add in traits like overthinking, needing order, or being hyper-aware of our environment, and it can look a lot like obsessive-compulsive disorder. By the end of this video, you'll know the clear differences between INFJ tendencies and actual OCD symptoms, how to recognize overlap without mislabeling yourself, and what INFJs can do to manage perfectionism and anxiety in healthier ways. Stick with me because we're also going to look at how INFJs can leverage emotional intelligence and even AI tools to avoid falling into destructive thought loops. Let's get into it. Section 1, what OCD really is. Let's start with OCD, obsessive-compulsive. This isn't just being neat or liking things organized. OCD has two parts. Number one, obsessions. These are intrusive, unwanted thoughts, images, or urges that trigger intense anxiety. Number two, compulsions.
With OCD, people have frequent unwanted thoughts, ideas or urges, obsessions, or repetitive behaviors, compulsions, that they feel driven to do in response to the obsession. Obsessions may include a fear of contamination, extreme concern with order, or recurrent unwanted intrusive thoughts of sounds, images, words, or numbers. Compulsions are repetitive, excessive behaviors that occur in response to obsessions. Those behaviors might involve excessive hand-washing or cleaning, checking locks and appliances, or approval-seeking. OCD is different from typical worry. Someone with OCD may repeat behaviors for over an hour a day to try to prevent or reduce anxiety, distress, or dread. Some will know their behaviors won't reduce the likelihood of the focus of their obsessions. But for someone with OCD, not performing the behaviors can cause even more distress. If you believe that you or a family member has OCD, work with a mental health professional to develop a plan to manage symptoms. The American Psychiatric Association has great resources on OCD.
The key is that OCD is clinical. It consumes time, causes distress, and disrupts daily life. It's not just a preference, it's a disorder that often requires therapy or treatment. Types of OCD themes. OCD can look different from person to person, but researchers have identified a few common themes. Contamination fears, the classic germs or fear of illness, symmetry and order, needing things perfectly lined up, just right. Harm obsessions, intrusive thoughts about accidentally hurting yourself or others. Taboo or forbidden thoughts, often shocking or disturbing, sexual, violent, or religious content that the person doesn't want but can't shut off. Hoarding, difficulty throwing things away, even if they're not useful. The key thing to remember is that these aren't personality quirks. They're driven by distressing, intrusive thoughts, and the compulsions are attempts to manage unbearable anxiety. Section 2, what INFJs are like. Now let's look at INFJs. We're intuitive, empathetic, and idealistic. We see patterns quickly, and we often hold ourselves and others to high standards. Many INFJs describe themselves as perfectionists. We hate small talk, but we'll spend hours analyzing the meaning behind a 5-minute interaction. We care about order, harmony, and living authentically. But here's the difference. For INFJs, these tendencies come from personality wiring, not from intrusive anxiety loops. We may overthink, but we don't usually feel compelled to perform rituals just to keep the anxiety away. Section 3, the neuroscience of OCD. Now let's zoom in on the neuroscience of OCD, because this is where things get fascinating. Research shows that OCD isn't just about habits or quirks. It's connected to how the brain's circuits fire. The main areas involved are the orbitofrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the basal ganglia. Here's what that means in plain language. The orbitofrontal cortex is like your brain's error detector. In OCD, it goes into overdrive, constantly flagging things as wrong or dangerous even when they're not. The anterior cingulate is tied to worry and emotional regulation. In OCD, it's hyperactive, which fuels that sense of urgency and anxiety. The basal ganglia, which helps control motor behavior, gets stuck in a loop. So once the brain sends a do something signal, it doesn't switch off easily. On top of that, studies show imbalances in serotonin, a neurotransmitter that regulates mood, impulse control, and decision making. That's why treatments like SSRIs, which boost serotonin, often help reduce OCD symptoms. So when someone with OCD feels the urge to check the door 10 times or wash their hands until they're raw, it's not just in their head. Their brain's wiring is literally caught in a feedback loop that keeps the anxiety alive. Section 4, the neuroscience of INFJs. Now let's flip the lens and talk about INFJs. While INFJ is a personality type, not a disorder, neuroscience research on introverts and intuitives gives us clues about what might be happening in our brains. INFJs often score high in something called cortical arousal. That means our brains are more sensitive to stimulation, social interactions, bright environments, even emotional cues. This is why too much small talk or surface level noise can feel overwhelming. Our circuits are literally firing harder. We also lean heavily on the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain linked to long-term planning, pattern recognition, and abstract thinking. That explains why INFJs are always connecting dots others miss. We're wired to see meaning beneath the surface. And here's a fascinating detail. Studies suggest introverts have stronger activity in the parasympathetic nervous system, which regulates calm and reflection. That's why INFJs may need long stretches of solitude to process and recharge. So while OCD locks the brain into anxiety loops, INFJs channel their mental energy into depth, intuition, and empathy. Both involve intense brain activity, but one is disruptive and compulsive, while the other, when managed, is a gift for insight and connection. Section 5, Shadow Side of INFJ Perfectionism. Now let's be real about the INFJ shadow side, perfectionism. On the surface, INFJs look disciplined and driven. But underneath, perfectionism can backfire in a few painful ways. We procrastinate, not because we're lazy, but because we're afraid of starting something that won't live up to our own standards. We freeze up, what I call paralysis by alignment, when things don't feel just right. If the vibe, the timing, or the details aren't aligned, we'd rather not move forward at all. And the irony is, this can feel obsessive. You're circling the same decision, replaying the same scenario, stalling on the same project. But here's the distinction. This isn't OCD. It's not driven by intrusive anxiety loops. It's the INFJ perfectionist tendency taken too far, turning our gift for vision into a roadblock instead of momentum. Section 6, where INFJ traits look like OCD. Here's where the confusion happens. Both INFJs and people with OCD can struggle with perfectionism, get stuck in loops of rumination, feel the need for order and control. So on the surface, it can look the same. But here's the dividing line. OCD thoughts are intrusive, unwanted, and often irrational, and compulsions are driven by anxiety. INFJ habits, on the other hand, usually serve meaning and purpose. We might stress over getting a project just right, but we're not repeating an action endlessly to stop a catastrophic thought. So how do you know if it's INFJ perfectionism or something more? Frequency and distress. OCD obsessions are relentless and highly distressing. INFJ worries ebb and flow with context. Compulsions. OCD behaviors are repetitive rituals to neutralize fear. INFJs don't rely on compulsions. We may overthink, but we're not ritualizing to fight anxiety. Impact on life. OCD interferes with work, relationships, and basic functioning. INFJ traits, while sometimes draining, usually enhance life when managed well. People with OCD often know their fears are irrational, but still feel powerless to stop. INFJs generally recognize when they're overanalyzing and can self-correct. Bottom line, OCD is a disorder, INFJ is a personality type. Section 7, misdiagnosis risk. Now here's where it gets tricky, misdiagnosis. Highly sensitive INFJs often get mislabeled as having OCD, ADHD, or generalized anxiety. Why? Because our traits, overthinking, high sensitivity, perfectionism, or needing order, can look clinical if someone doesn't understand personality nuance. I've heard from so many INFJs who've been told they're too rigid or too anxious, when in reality, they're just wired for depth and meaning. But here's the catch. Sometimes those traits do overlap with real disorders.
Let's take a look at a couple of really quick statistics. 90% of lifetime respondents with OCD met the criteria for another lifetime disorder. 79.2% of cases of OCD began after comorbid anxiety disorders. Only a minority of severe cases received treatment for OCD. So this diagnosis is incredibly easy to miss. Why is that? Because OCD feels like really bad anxiety. 65% of people with OCD rank as severely impaired on a disability scale.
That's why self-awareness matters so much. If your habits are draining life or creating distress, professional support is always a smart move. Otherwise, don't let a label define you. INFJs aren't broken, we're rare. And understanding the difference between personality wiring and disorder is part of owning our strengths. Quick break. If you're finding this breakdown helpful, hit that like button. I'm not a tech genius, but I've been building these videos late at night, learning tools like HeyGenDescript and ChatGPT, just to bring you content that connects personality and psychology. When you hit like, it tells YouTube we're doing something worthwhile, and it helps more people who need this message find it. Thanks for supporting me and my family. Now, let's get back into it. Section 8, Tools for INFJs. Here's the good news. INFJs can use emotional intelligence and even AI tools to manage overthinking before it becomes destructive. For example, journaling with prompts from ChatGPT can help INFJs externalize thoughts instead of looping on them. Mindfulness apps can help break rumination spirals, and leaning into our intuition, asking why am I feeling this way, helps us distinguish between meaningful reflection and anxious overthinking. As the APA defines it, OCD involves intrusive, distressing thoughts and repetitive rituals. If you ever suspect OCD, always seek professional help. But if you're simply an INFJ wrestling with perfectionism, know that your traits can be powerful assets when channeled correctly. INFJs are rare, and yes, we often feel like outsiders, but understanding the difference between our personality traits and OCD helps us use our depth for growth instead of getting stuck in fear. If you want more, check out my INFJ series. Videos like Only 1% of People Think Like This, They Resent Your Light, and 15 Famous INFJs will take you even deeper. I'll link them here on the screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.